Gripen. We at Saab, we also work with commercial business. So we do sell, for example, digital control towers for air traffic control, command and control systems, and much, much more. Today, I will specifically focus on how we work with investments. Because Saab does spend around 24% of the turnover in R&D. So I want to make my first point just around this, and that is the importance of technology development. R&D is the building block for the future, and specifically if you talk about creative destruction, the process of where new innovation replaces old innovation, this is the best way really to work with that type of process and to keep competitive. That is to work with R&D and innovation. And economic growth built on innovation is also a very important way of safeguarding stability in the world and resilience. So by investing in tomorrow, we build a better future world. And with our heritage from the 1930s, that our mission then is very deeply rooted, and that is to keep societies and people safe. So now to my second point, and that's about sustainability. The importance of sustainability and to kind of create a resilient world is, of course, I think in everybody's mind at the moment. And to be clear, we believe that global challenges such as climate change, human rights, health, and inequality can only be fully addressed if societies are safe and resilient. So we want to contribute to sustainable development via business practice that is responsible or are responsible, but we also want to work with customers and partners on sustainable innovation. We have mapped our company and seen where can we have the greatest impact when it comes to sustainable development, to find synergies between Saab's business plan and the UN sustainability goals. We also worked with science-based targets initiatives, and they have improved, the organization SBTi has approved our emission reduction targets, making Saab the first major defense and security company to receive an approval, which means that we are aligned with the Paris Agreement. We also work with, for example, and we have committed to the UN's Race to Zero campaign. And then I want to go to my third point, and that's space. So space has always been somewhat of a challenge for us humans. We started looking up at the stars. We've been working with astronomy. The space race between the US and the USSR, of course, drove a lot of development. We had the Apollo program, the first space shuttle, the collaboration on the International Space Station. And today we have new space where in kind of commercial industry actually are able to provide a lot of value when it comes to space development. And within defense, we see a special kind of interest around SDA and SDA, Space Domain Awareness, that's basically looking up in the sky to see what's above us. ISR, that's the opposite, using satellites to look down and understand what's happening below on Earth. SATCOM, putting communication equipment, payloads on satellites and using that for communication. And PNT, which is position, navigation, and timing, where the GPS, of course, is the most well-known application or system for that. And as a defense and security company, we see that not only from a defense perspective, but from a commercial perspective, there is going to be a lot of value built. So the World Economic Forum and McKinsey has basically kind of said in April this year that the space economy will soar from 630 billion to 1.8 trillion by 2035. So the value is just going to increase. And at Saab, we focus on how to enhance our systems through space capabilities to the benefit for our customers. And that can, for example, be working with space data for ISR, awareness for our customers. We launched a satellite, Ymir-1, last year. And our former chief test pilot, now chief innovation officer, Marcus Wandt, became the latest Swedish ESA astronaut this year. And a note about Poland here, the country recently increased both its engagement and contribution with ESA to support the Polish space sector. So a shout out to Poland. Would be delighted to explore a collaboration around space from Saab's perspective. So now I talked about innovation, I talked about sustainability, and I talked about space. So now I'm going to talk about a practical example of this. And this is about our kind of satellite Ymir-1. So let's just talk about AIS. That is Automatic Identification System. It exists today all around in the maritime world. It's transponders, basically, that says, I am here to avoid a collision. So it's a system for safety in the maritime world. We are now working with the next generation of AIS called VDES, VHF Data Exchange System. And there you don't only transmit your position, you can actually communicate. We recently launched Ymir-1, a satellite with a payload with a VDES transponder with SpaceX Falcon 9 in November last year. And it's an in-orbit demonstration. So basically, we're using it as a prototype, R&D. Not the transponder, but actually putting it on a satellite. And one satellite will not make a system, but this is a first step in the direction of making sure that we can send a whole system, many satellites up and make a constellation. And here you see, this is the superhighways of the sea today. This is actually a picture from Ymir-1. It's kind of transponder on board in September 2024. And this is AIS. So you now see all those green dots. That's our merchant ships, navy ships, yachts, and aids to navigation, like, for example, fish farms. And this is really interesting from the perspective that we today see where they are. But the next step with VDES will be to actually have all of these ships communicating with each other. So it will be quite a capability enhancement. And an important voting will happen next year, spring 2025, at the UN IMO, to also bring in VDES, this new technology, into the fold of regulations. And this will create a global, affordable, and secure communication system that can optimize shipping routes and fuel to reduce energy consumption and emissions. And it will create greater efficiency and safety in the maritime industry, supporting further economic growth. And here you see how we mapped out this specific technology towards the UN Sustainability Development Goals. But we have just scratched the surface. This is one of many ways that Saab is working on to contribute for a more sustainable and resilient future. Next session in this room will be about national infrastructure for a society is resilient, and this is an excellent example of how we can build a stronger and more resilient maritime infrastructure. So I'd like to thank you for your time and go back to the joke in the beginning. What does Earth say to tease the other planets? You guys have no life. Let's make sure that we excel in the stewardship of this planet, of this life. Let's together work on safeguarding people and societies, and let's use tech and sustainability-oriented innovation to explore new frontiers and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I must say I'm personally extremely excited about this new AIS system. Being an avid sailor, this will be absolutely fantastic. And the accessibility for that, well, kudos to Saab. And very interesting to hear about those developments. So again, we're very happy to have such a partner here at the Warsaw Security Forum. Jenny, thank you again for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll move to the next discussion, which will be a panel discussion on the military-civilian divide. Very interesting. And the role of critical infrastructure in it for society's resilience. And to moderate this panel, I'd like to invite Benjamin Schmitt, who's a senior fellow at the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Pennsylvania in the US. Benjamin, please join us on stage.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Warsaw Security Forum and our panel on critical infrastructure protection. And I couldn't be more excited to moderate this panel, which we have some of the leading minds and experts and former officials working on these issues. And I'll just do a quick introduction. To my left is Major General Johan Pekkari, the Chief of the Directorate of Strategic Plans and Policy at the Swedish Armed Forces in Sweden. Next, we have CEO Jarosław Grzywiński at NASK of Poland, which is a cyber firm. And then last but not least, we have Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission in the United States. And I think I'll just start by saying we are in a new era of critical infrastructure protection, but also resilience. We have seen, since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, an increasing number of cyber attacks, but also physical infrastructure attacks against energy and critical infrastructure. I think we could easily say that this started on January 7th, 2022, when a Russian fishing trawler, the Melkart 5, was viewed on AIS passing over a critical subsea telecommunications cable from the Svalsat facility, the Svalbard commercial satellite infrastructure station, and cutting that cable that would prove important to the Ukrainian defense because commercial satellite data, of course, from both communications as well as geospatial imagery became very important for Ukraine in the coming weeks after that happened, of course, with Russia's large-scale invasion happening just a month later. We've flashed forward, we've seen the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea be destroyed. We've seen the Baltic Connector pipeline between Finland and Estonia be destroyed. We have seen cyber attacks again and again. I've heard from officials that this is happening on an hourly, not just daily, but hourly basis across all of NATO, and we need to get this under control because I just testified before U.S. Congress last week at a hearing called Russia's Shadow War on NATO, and my question is this a shadow war, or is this a hybrid war, or is this just war in general? And I think that that continues to be the case. So whereas we continue to see these incidents taking place in the media and seeing these as localized incidents, we are seeing more and more attribution to the Russian Federation itself, Russian state actors, as well as Russia's military intelligence, the GRU, hiring locals and folks from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Poland, etc., to carry out these low-scale sabotage attacks and cyber attacks across the EU and across NATO territory. And so my question I'll ask later on is about what NATO can do to respond. But first, I want to pass this along and have rapid reactions to where we are now, and is this an unprecedented scale that we're seeing, or is this just something that we need to take as the new normal? First to you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for inviting me here today. And I think I should begin with saying that I'm also the cyber commander in Sweden. So if I lean towards that field, please bear with me. I think we are all familiar with modern society's dependence on critical infrastructure, and when looking forward, we will get even more dependent as we have the digital transformation and so on. The armed forces isn't any different. We are also dependent on some of the critical infrastructure, of course. And more generally put, we are dependent on a functioning society as a whole. Consequently, what is critical for society is also critical for the armed forces. However, the solution is not that the armed forces is responsible for the protection of all the critical infrastructure and the vulnerabilities. That would simply not be possible. Instead, we as a society must be resilient and forestall the potential impact from any attack, be it thanks to physical protection, redundancy, or by a psychological strong society. A resilient society is probably also the best deterrence by denial. Creating resilience in society demands collaboration, and this is not at least important for us in Sweden, since we have very strong agencies with independent responsibilities. And as a result, our civil defense and our civil preparedness rely a lot on collaboration between all sectors, including the private sector. However, resilience cannot be developed cross-government only. We need to do it as well, cross-border as well. Underwater cables, as you mentioned, between nations is a good example of that. They are between Sweden and Finland, for example. They pass international waters as well. So therefore, institutions like the European Union, like NATO, have huge responsibilities here and important roles as well. In conclusion then, what is the role of the armed forces in this? I think we can and will protect some of the critical infrastructure, but we will never be able to do it, all of them, and we will not be able to do it always. So what we really can provide is probably information about the threat, about the challenges, and make sure that all the society has all the information they need and the correct situational awareness, including our international partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Jarosław?
So I agree that firstly, it's not only military role for securing of critical infrastructure. The definition, in general, the definition of the critical infrastructure is broader than years ago. Yes, so now in European Union we have many sectors described as critical. So like energy, water supply, of course, banks infrastructure, cybersecurity infrastructure, and what is, from our perspective, the most important thing is, I think, good planning, good cooperation between military and civilian entities. And this is the key to the success. And of course, the next complicated thing is the chain of supply. Yeah, chain of supplies is very complicated, and it's also not only a national issue. Yes, it's an international issue, not only European issue. When we say about the NATO, I think that transatlantic cooperation and planning is a crucial thing, and this I think we have to build between us each year, because we have to develop also the new elements, for example, the artificial intelligence, yes, as the key element for the cybersecurity, and not only cybersecurity, of course, for any kind of security.
Great, thank you. Rear Admiral Montgomery, please.
Well, thanks, and I agree with what both my co-panelists have said, and I want to thank the Warsaw Security Forum for bringing up this issue. I think it's an important one. I'll say bluntly, from a critical infrastructure point of view, there's three areas that are lines of effort that are under attack. The first is national security. The second is economic productivity. The third is public health and safety. We have to defend all of them, and that's why it's not just the military. But picking up on the national security one, this is incredibly challenging for us, because it's the rail, aviation, and port systems critical to the military to move supplies, move equipment, move troops, both from across the Atlantic, but also within Europe, but predominantly owned and operated by private sector companies. And we know our adversaries understand the vulnerability there. In the United States, we've recently released highly classified information about something called Volt Typhoon, a Chinese attempt to put malicious payloads in our infrastructures, in our ports, aviation, rail, electrical power, and water. And this was not espionage. It was not criminal activity. It's what you call operational preparation of the battlefield. It was a warlike action put in there. I promise you, the Russians have done the same stuff in Western Europe, and they've done this in the United States as well. We just have chose not to release it yet. This is important because we're going to have to very rapidly do an assessment, a prioritization, and then an action effort to identify and remove this malware from the systems to ensure that we can have a rapid movement of forces across the Atlantic and through Western to Eastern Europe during a crisis or contingency. So a very important issue, one we need to tackle with some level of priority and immediacy.
Well, thank you. I'd like to broaden this out a little bit and look at the intersection between cyber and physical security of critical infrastructure. And a few examples that we've seen of this synergy has been right at the outset of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Federation was attributed to have conducted a cyber attack against Viasat to try to take out Ukrainians' space-based communications capabilities. But at the same time, that resulted in significant downstream effects across Europe, including energy infrastructure, windmills in Germany getting shut down and things like that, creating energy insecurity and vulnerabilities. At the same time, to Admiral Montgomery's point, we've seen NATO critical infrastructure, including the NATO pipeline network, have basically explosives and detonators deliberately buried next to the NATO pipeline network. And so I'll go in reverse order this time down the panel and ask, what can we do? These are clearly hybrid and multidisciplinary threats. And how do we bring our various forces in law enforcement and military and civil society to bear to counter these threats?
Well, I think there are some good opportunities here. The first I'll start with is the new NATO Integrated Cyber Defense Center. It's going to be, wisely, it's going to be put its shape. And the reason it needs to be at the NATO headquarters is because it needs to be very closely attached to the NATO planners. This is something that, that is 10 years late to need, so right on time for NATO. But they are, from my perspective, you now take the NATO war plans, which are becoming, the regional defense plans are becoming useful. 5-10 years ago, they were 50 pages. Now they're 400 or 500 pages with their annexes. You take those regional defense plans and you look at all the infrastructure that's necessary, and you begin to get a list of critical, or what we call significant infrastructure assets. You then have to prioritize those according to the plan. This is going to create discomfort in European countries because what NATO needs for a war plan to be mitigated or made secure may not be the number one utility or infrastructure asset that a country that actually owns it would consider. They may consider it number 4 or 5 in their idea of economic productivity or public health and safety, but it might be number 1 to NATO for national security. So we're going to have to work our way through this prioritization. So from my mind, the NIC, that the NATO Integrated Cyber Defense Center, is going to play a critical role in the prioritization. If this does not happen, if the countries defer from taking these responsibilities on, our war plans will not be executable. If the war plans are not executable, Russia over time will realize that our deterrence is ineffective.
Thank you. Jarosław?
So a few words about cybersecurity issues, because I think that is the highest role now in the next years for cybersecurity issues. And what is the most important at the first stage is the national security, and to build the good national cyber security for each critical infrastructure. And then I think we can think about the cooperation, international cooperation and NATO cooperation, cyber security issues. Now I think that many national cyber security infrastructures are not compatible. This is, I think, the part of what you said, yeah, that this is this issue have to be executed, not only described on plans, on papers, on strategies.
If I could pick up on that, I agree completely, and I don't think we can wait for 32 countries to get secure critical infrastructure and then get together and have a plan. I think I agree with your point that all countries have to tackle this. But within that, NATO has lost the luxury of waiting for everyone to get ready. We're going to really have to kind of fly the plane while we're building it. And that means getting these prioritization lists. And look, just because NATO says something is number one does not mean Poland or Germany or the Netherlands will treat it as number one, but it needs to be much higher up their priority list. And I think we can get to a successful place. And believe me, the United States is in a glass house. Our national critical infrastructure is as vulnerable as anyone's in Western Europe, in Europe's. And we have a highly networked society, so we need to fix ours as well. But we have to do this now. The 10-year delay, has an impact, and the impact is we're going to have to do things in series, in parallel, vice in series.
Well said, Major General Pekkari.
I agree with what has been said, and if I like to add anything there, I think we need to develop the collaboration all the way from the local level, the lowest level, all the way up to the national level and to NATO and other international forums as well. In addition, we need to train this and exercise this. We never do that, not as far as I know. It is about going through the ODA loop to observe. We need to be able to observe what happens, have this situational awareness. We need to be able to orient who attribute the things that is happening, and also making sure that we have a valid decision-making process in place, nationally and internationally. And also, of course, the last step will be countermeasures then to add to that. And do TTDs, scenario-based discussions in order to be prepared to meet the challenges that we will do in the future.
Very well put. I'm going to go to Jarosław next and then have our military experts build on. Clearly, we have seen that critical infrastructure protection is a private sector matter as well. As Rear Admiral Montgomery has said, a lot of these infrastructure facilities are, private, even transportation, rail. There's been many attacks against rail infrastructure and electricity and telecommunications cables that support it being cut in Germany and other countries. And we've seen attribution towards Russia in some of these cases, and some it still is unexplained. But clearly, the private sector has to further synergize and share its data, and then the military and law enforcement have to be part of that process as well. How do you get to that point?
Yeah. So absolutely, this issue is a private sector responsibility. One good example from July this year, CrowdStrike outage. Yes, so it was a global outage for air transport caused by a CrowdStrike error in software, probably. Yeah. So and it was disaster. Yes. For 2 or 3 days for the whole air transport sector. And it was not military issue. It was private sector responsibility also for support of the most essential sectors in critical infrastructure branch. So I agree that it's probably now we have to more cooperate because it is mostly private sector responsibility.
Major General Pekkari and then Admiral Montgomery.
Completely agree with. We need to develop public-private partnerships. We are doing it right now back home in Sweden when it comes to cyber defense, creating cyber defense units specialized on critical infrastructure, and we need to meet in the public domain and the private domain and get the best out of it.
Admiral Montgomery?
So, that the idea of prioritization, it's going to take an agreement with the private sector, right? Particularly in the United States, 85% of our national critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector, including almost all of the elements critical to military mobility, about 98%, all but 2 ports. So to do that, you're going to have to convince them to establish a higher level of prioritization in cybersecurity. And to do that, you're going to have to incentivize it or regulate it. Both of those are challenging political issues in the United States, and I think sometimes they're challenging political issues in Europe for different reasons. But if we don't understand this is going to cost money to get ourselves to high-level security, and the reason is the vast majority of these systems were put in a highly automated environment about 15 to 20 years ago before we understood the cybersecurity threat. So we took people out of the loop, installed automated systems in our water and our pipelines and our power grids and our rail systems. We pulled people out of the system, saved a ton of money, and spent none of it on cybersecurity. Now, within the last 5 to 7 years, you see the cybersecurity threat, and you have a bill, and most of those companies can't remember that they had a large savings from going to this automated system. So we're going to have to, the governments are going to have to incentivize to get the companies beginning to invest. Then the companies have to make the long-term investments in those cybersecurity systems in order for us to be secure.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, then kick it to the audience, but I hope this is not a provocative question. I don't think it should be. I called on Congress to support this just last week, but we've seen dozens and dozens of critical infrastructure and energy infrastructure attacks over the past few years, and it's gotten to a fever pitch in the last 6 months with cyber attacks and critical infrastructure attacks and sabotage taking place in places like the United Kingdom, France, Poland, the Czech Republic. And I pick on those four in particular because they have attributed publicly from their governments that the Russian Federation or Russia-hired actors that the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, has recruited on sources like Telegram and other parts of social media have carried out these attacks. So are we at a place that NATO Article 4 consultative mechanisms should be basically called upon at NATO headquarters to attribute this and raise the stakes a bit on the Putin regime? And I'll go first to you, Admiral Montgomery.
Sure. So, look, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is there have been 7 Article 4 attempts, over the life of the NATO alliance. 5 of them were Turkish complaints about Syria for the most part, and 2 of them, the other 2 were the invasion of Crimea and then the most recent illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's the 7. So there's a whole lot of events, as you've mentioned, that have happened in physical security and in cybersecurity that haven't caused Article 4. The way it needs to happen is the United States needs to get together with some key allies and release a previously classified, I'm sure it's classified, data dump of all the Russian provocations against the infrastructure, either physical or cyber, not ones that are espionage, not ones that are criminal behavior, but ones that are clearly operational preparation of the battlefield, and say this in its totality mandates an Article 4 hearing so we can sit down and discuss it. I think that would be perfectly timed as that NIC, NATO Integrated Cyber Defense Center I mentioned, as they begin to come up on step and are able to operate, they would then get Article 4 guidance to go look at these issues, examine them, do the assessment so you can do the prioritization, so you can take the action. So it's absolutely perfectly timed to get an Article 4 going over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, Admiral. Jarosław. And I know you're in the private sector, so you might have just personal opinions on this.
No, it's more military question, yeah?
Okay.
We discussed in Poland years, I think, how to execute Article 4, and I think it's a complicated issue, and maybe it's not time, in my opinion, to use this article as we understood this for years, yes, because we developed, yes, as armies, allies, and I think what we need now is open discussion between NATO countries, how to use and how to understand Article 4 wording for those years.
Great. And Major General Pekkari.
I think I like the structure. Article 3 comes before Article 4 by reason, and Article 4 comes before Article 5 by reason. And I really hope that we are having consultations without invoking Article 4. Having that said, I think there is Article 4 also says that if any party feels that its territorial integrity is threatened, they can call for consultations. Obviously, no nation does that so far, so it is up to the nations, actually.
Okay, good point. And of course, NATO has done a lot on this front, not only on cyber. They've started a critical subsea infrastructure protection cell for policy at NATO headquarters and a operational cell at Marcom. So this is there's a lot going on. Well,
and that was last year. And I'll say on my theory that NATO's 10 years late on infrastructure. They're 9 years late on, submarine infrastructure. I do think I'm reminded of the Iranian attack on Albania and say that probably also reasonably, because it was attributed, would have warranted an Article 4 consultation if the Albanians had the gumption to ask for it.
Very good. I'm going to kick this. We have just a couple minutes left. Questions from the audience. Maybe we get one or two in. Just really quick questions, not comments. Yes? This gentleman over here.
Marek Ziółkowski, former Polish ambassador to NATO a few years ago. NATO is both political and military alliance. In this context you raised, should be NATO considered in the future, maybe now, to be a technological alliance?
Should this be a technological alliance? Let's go down the row. I think we just have time for that one question. So this is also your final thoughts.
Sure. So first, in responding to the question, I'll say I think the NATO Investment Fund and some of the other efforts that we see going on at NATO to develop alliance member critical technology efforts at startups and things like that is a sign that the alliance has evolved into a technological one. My final comments, what I would say is that critical infrastructure, countries are starting to recognize the importance of critical infrastructure they've understood it for public health and safety. I think they're getting it for economic productivity, but now with national security, it really is coming to what we call a high warble. In other words, a high level of intensity. And it is time, this needs to operate not on NATO time. This needs to be accelerated. I think that the NIC, the Integrated Cyber Defense Center, needs to have quality products within 24 months, products that reflect the existing NATO regional defense plans. And then we can begin, the NATO commander and the political leadership of NATO can work with their home countries to begin to prioritize these issues. If there's one country that understands all these vulnerabilities in excruciating detail, it's Russia. They have mapped our infrastructure to the nth degree. The Soviet Union did the same thing. The Soviet Union concentrated on Spetsnaz and physical attacks. I think Russia will concentrate on SVR and cyber attacks. We need to be ready for this because it is going to come to a crisis near us.
And not 9 years late, not 10 years late, but now.
Now.
Okay. Jarosław, your final thoughts.
So absolutely, I think that NATO is now also technological alliance. And as we talked about this use of Article 4, we have to define whether Article 4 is to use when we have only conventional invasion or also cyber attack. Yeah? It's also a question of technology.
And Major General Pekkari, to close us out.
Sweden has been a member of the alliance for 7 months.
And welcome. We should all say welcome, of course.
I think I agree with what has been said regarding technology. You should also emphasize the innovation programs and so on, that it's important for the alliance and for the nations. We should also keep in mind that we have the baselines for resilience within NATO as well, so that is a job for NATO as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was just a fantastic panel and discussion from experts on this. And remember, as you take away something from this panel, critical infrastructure protection, energy infrastructure protection, cyber protection of critical infrastructure, not a nice to have, but a must have for transatlantic national security, NATO and EU security. And so we need to make sure this continues to be in our policy frameworks as we go forward. So thank you all again, and let's hear it for our speakers.